All right, let's begin. You all can hear me okay? Just a final check. Awesome. Let's begin. So hello, everyone, and good evening. Can I hear some good evenings here? All right.
Hey.
It's an excited room. Welcome to one of the first sessions of Ignite 2018, Backup Your Data with Microsoft Azure Backup. I am Saurabh Sen Sharma. I'm a Senior Program Manager with the Azure Backup Product Engineering team. And joining me for this session is Shivam Garg.
Thanks, Saurabh. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. So let's begin. We've had an amazing day, right? How many of you attended the keynote? Wow, almost all of you. The general sessions? Awesome. So you know that there is so much happening with Windows, Azure, Dynamics, M365, Office 365, and so many products and services to be able to transform your IT and bring the next wave of innovative solutions to your customers. What an amazing time to be in IT. So let's give ourselves a big round of applause for being in IT. Awesome, you guys are doing a great job. And at the core of this transformation is data. Data that is ever growing, data that is unlocking your business, and it's driving your business. It's unlocking devices, it's unlocking insights, with the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Now, for a moment, let's pause and imagine this data being held hostage. Now, what you're seeing on the screen is not a security drill. It is actually a real ransomware attack that happened to a friend of mine, Annette. She was managing a server which caught this ransomware attack. And when Annette saw the screen, she knew that her data is unavailable because ransomware had encrypted it. And the fact that she has to pay 29 bitcoins. Anyone know what a bitcoin costs these days? $6,700. That's a lot of money for a single bitcoin. 29 bitcoins to unlock her data. But then the good news was she had backups. So she went and tried to recover from those backups, but then she realized that it's a dual ransomware attack. So the ransomware had not only encrypted her data, but it had also deleted her backups. Now she was down to her last option, which is pay the ransom. But then this is a lot of money, right? So what she did was she gave these two files to the attacker to decrypt those files. The attacker decrypted them. Awesome. She paid the ransom, unfortunately. But the issue was the two files that she gave to the attacker had customer-sensitive data. Now think about that. You had a ransomware attack, it encrypted your data, you tried to negotiate, and you end up causing a data theft. Well, the attack of ransomware on any organization can have a crippling effect. The issue is that ransomware is getting smarter, and now with GDPR regulations asking you, organizations, to tell customers whenever there is a data breach, the impact of loss of data is just tremendous. I mean, you lose customer trust, it impacts your IT career, my IT career, and also the fact that it affects the brand, right? So when all else fails, Annette went and looked at her backups. But as we learned from this story, it is not just backups that can help you be secure and safe from ransomware, but it's actually having secure backups, right? And that forms your last line of defense. So in today's session, what we're going to cover and introduce to you is the Azure Backup Service. Now, Azure Backup Service is a productized service offering which is built into Azure, which gives you not only secure backups, but also through self-service management using zero infrastructure helps you lower the cost of managing and doing backups in the cloud. So this is really, really unique. And by the way, it also is a very critical cloud capability which differentiates Azure from other cloud providers. So that's what we're going to do today in this session. The key takeaways that we want to have from this session is to see the built-in nature of Azure Backup and how it delivers zero infrastructure at scale, right? So that you don't have to provision any infrastructure for your backups, whether they are in the cloud or on premises. And the fact that it's all self-service, you get to lower and sort of predict your TCO in an easier manner. There is no upfront cost. And finally, and most importantly, we're going to talk about security of these backups and how it helps you stay compliant and protect you from situations like ransomware attack or deletions by malicious admins. All of that is going to be covered in this session today. And we're going to see how all of this makes Azure a trusted cloud platform for your data, right? So let me invite Shivam.
Yeah, so how many of you realize that we are not wearing the speaker shirts? Microsoft has relaxed the restriction on that. So we thought we will make this session a little bit more fun and engaging, where I'll be the voice of the customer. I'll represent all of you. And Saurabh will be the resident backup expert.
Wow.
And with that, I have a little bit of fun element, the graduation cap, which I conferred to Saurabh.
Oh my God.
And if you like the idea, it was our idea. And if you don't like it, my boss may be somewhere sitting in the audience.
So yeah.
He came up with this idea.
Great point. Yeah, seriously, if you don't like this, it's all on him. All right, so let's start this very, very quickly. So any questions, like as a customer advocate?
Yeah, so I mean, backup is a decades-old concept. What has really changed?
Backup is a decade-old concept, absolutely true. What has changed is there is an accelerated digital transformation taking place. Folks are actually moving infrastructure from their IT on-premises into the cloud, right? And they're taking advantage of cloud services to be able to transform their products, engage their customers, empower them, and optimize operations. But I was talking to some of you here, and it actually presents a very interesting situation. With this transformation, you have deployments in the cloud, right? So you could either be using IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS services in the cloud and taking advantage of them. Or I was talking to a gentleman at the back, I think it was Mr. Vipul, right? And he told me that he has a bunch of hybrid applications, right? So they are actually taking advantage of the cloud, but his infrastructure is still on premises and connected to Azure. So you could either be there, or you could be completely on premises, sort of thinking about your digital transformation journey, trying to move to the cloud, and whatnot, right? So Shivam, let me ask you this question. With this interesting situation, what is the ideal data protection solution in your mind?
Yeah, so I have been talking to a bunch of you since morning, and what I realized as a customer that is moving to the cloud, you are looking for a seamless backup solution. That should just work whenever you rent the infrastructure in the cloud. So backup should be like a checkbox. And let me give you an analogy that why the expectations are higher when you rent the infrastructure. If I buy a car, I need to manage and maintain it. For example, I need to get the insurance renewed at every year. Then I need to get it serviced very regularly, maybe every 6 months. But whenever I rent the car, and even if my tire gets flat, I just call the rental car company, the 1-800 number, and they come with a brand new car, give it to me, I walk away with it. So this is the kind of expectation I have when I rent the infrastructure. So backup to me should be like a checkbox. It should be just there, isn't it?
Wow, that's a great requirement. How many of you are with Shivam on that? Do you feel rented infrastructure should just do things? Show of hands? All right. So all we are hearing is that backup, just like any other infrastructure service, should be built into the platform. It should be seamless. It should allow you to manage all these mix of deployments that I talked about, whether they're in the cloud, hybrid, or on premises. And finally, as Shivam was mentioning, rented infrastructure should not need you to manage that infrastructure, vis-a-vis manage the car. I should get freedom from managing backup infrastructure if I'm basically going to the cloud, right? And that's exactly what we have built. So let me introduce you to the Azure Backup service, which is right here. And you can see the architecture of the service. It's a built-in PaaS service, which is built on 3 primary principles. The principles of scalability, resiliency, and availability. What does that mean? So when you talk about backup, what's the first thing you think about? Any answers to that?
Recovery.
Restore. What about operations, scale? Storage, right? All of that. Compression, right? Somebody said compression. So all of that is essentially required by you to manage today, right? It's all built in to the Azure Backup service. So you have recovery point management happening. You have storage management happening, so you don't need to provision additional storage for your backup copies. And by the way, because it's resilient, it can protect you from malicious operations by giving you access to features like multi-user authentication, multi-factor authentication, access controls, and all of that, right? And by the way, it's also available, which means that any Azure region that you go to, you'll always find backup being available. And it does all of this with two primary requirements, which is to be able to centrally manage your backups at scale, whether they are running on premises or in the cloud, and do that in a secure manner. So that basically sums up the built-in data protection of Azure Backup.
So I'm really excited about this, Saurabh, but I want to understand what does built-in mean if I have a 3-tier app which has, let's say, the web front end running .NET, running in Azure VM, then I have the underlying set of databases. They're also hosted in Azure VM. Because these kind of 3-tier apps, I was running on-prem, and I'm actually moving to the cloud. So if you can go and let me show you one of the apps which I have.
All right, let's take a look at it.
Yeah, can you open the app?
Let's move to the app. And is this your app?
Yeah, I know you are backing it up. So just tell me, what does built-in mean for this?
Sure. Hold on. Whoa,
What happened?
Is this expected? I mean,
no, the data is mangled. I see the price is 0, the description is not right, so something has happened.
clearly.
Could it be the patch that I tried to put in the morning today?
Well,
That could have mangled the data?
could be. And let me just go back and just take a look at this. This is not looking normal. So let me do this. Let me try and restore this data using Azure Backup. And after I do that, I will show you how the built-in capabilities of Azure Backup come into play to back up all the tiers that Shivam talked about in his app. So we are quickly switching to a demo here. And this is the familiar Azure dashboard. Now I'm backing all of these resources to a recovery services vault. Now recovery services vault is sort of like a safe in Azure where you put all your backups. And it just scales. It's bottomless. It's infinite. So I have a recovery services vault here, Wonder Demo RS Vault. I'll just go click on it. And this is where I'm protecting or backing up the resources that Shivam was talking about, which are linked to his app. Now, when I go to the Recovery Services Vault out here on the Overview dashboard, I can go to Backup Items. And here, I can see all the different kinds of things I can be backing up to a Recovery Services Vault. So it's Azure Virtual Machine, SQL in Azure VM, Azure Backup Agent, Azure Backup Server, all of that, right? Now, for the purposes of this restore, let me go to SQL in Azure VM, and you said the database is powering the text, right?
Yes.
So let's just go to SQL in Azure VM, and we have this database here. Looks like the backup status is healthy, so which is good. Let me go click on this. And here, I'm able to see a bunch of restore points, and on this graph, wherever this is green, you actually have a log backup available for your database. So that gives you a very, very bird's eye view of how backups are happening for your database. Now, since I want to recover this database, let me go click on Restore DB right at the top. And this takes me to a 3-step wizard, right? The first step is to basically select a location where my databases are going to be restored. Now, since I want to overwrite the databases on that app, I can select Overwrite DB out here. Click OK. And the next step is to select a restore point. And this is my favorite, by the way. So I can just select any recovery point by just clicking on this graph. So let me ask you this, Shivam. When did you upgrade your app?
Around 8 in the morning.
OK, so let's just go right before 8. Let's say 7:51 a.m. And you can see it's also doing the time translation to tell me that it's local time plus UTC. And then I can just click on OK. And the final configuration is to make sure that my database is not syncing when the restore is happening, so that it doesn't conflict with the restore process. I just leave this option as is, click OK, and now I'm done with my restore configuration. I can just go hit restore.
That was super simple. It was like a breeze.
Exactly. So while this restore is happening, the question that you asked, Shivam, how is this built in? Let me just show that to you. So let me go back to my Azure dashboard. And out here, I have another recovery services vault. And in this process, I will show you how easy it is to back up your SQL DBs running inside virtual machines, right? So stay with me on this one. I just go click plus backup, and it asks me two simple questions. Where is my workload running? It's running in Azure. What do you want to back up? I can just click on this drop down, and out here I can select SQL Server in Azure VM preview. So this is available in public preview for all of you to use. And this exposes a two-step process to back up the DBs inside my SQL Server on an Azure virtual machine. The first step is to start discovery. I'll click on it. And what start discovery does is to automatically, and again, because we are built in, we are able to do that, is to be able to discover all the virtual machines that are in the same region as the recovery services vault. And what it can then do is to go discover all the databases that are running in those virtual machines, in the SQL Server instances, in those virtual machines, and do that without you installing anything yourself. Let me show you that. So I can also, by the way, search my recoveries, my virtual machines by just typing in the names. So I can quickly select one of them. And when I hit Discover DBs, it basically triggers off this process of discovery. Typically takes around 3 to 5 minutes. So what I've done is I've basically already discovered a few databases. You can see them here. These are all the virtual machines. And each of the details columns actually tells me how many DBs I've found per virtual machine. So this is really powerful because I didn't have to install anything, install any backup infrastructure anywhere, right? Once I'm done discovering, I can just go and configure backup. So let me show you that. I click on Configure Backup. And here, the databases that I had discovered are now showing up in a single view. Not only are they showing up in a single view, I can tell always on availability group databases from my standalone instance databases. Now this is really powerful. You can now associate your databases to an availability group and see them in a single view and back them up. Let me show you that. So this is a standalone instance. As you can see from the type column here, I can just 1, 2, 3 select the databases, and I can start backing them up. Or I can go to an availability group and start backing up the databases in that availability group. But let me show you something a little more interesting. There is an option called Auto Protect, right, which is right here in the center. And if I switch on Auto Protect, look what happens to the databases. It just starts getting automatically selected for backup. All of these databases get automatically selected. And not only that, when I add a new database to my SQL Server instance, they also automatically start backing up with the configured policy. So this is really powerful. You just set this, and you forget that you need to protect your databases. They get automatically protected. Now I'll click OK here. And then I come to the policy. And I want to take a moment here to talk about policy where we have understood from customer requirements that there are a bunch of policies which are most commonly used. So what we've done for you is to have these policies as defaults. For example, this hourly log backup policy. And by the way, we also have a log backup 15-minute policy, which gives you log backups for every 15 minutes. And I see my admins have created a bunch of other policies. I can create a new one here and configure a full, a differential, and a log backup policy. And by the way, I can set my log backups to go all the way down to 15 minutes. So that gives me an RPO of up to 15 minutes for my databases. Click OK. Give this policy a name. Say Ignite Test Policy. And I can click OK. And now when I select Enable Backup, I would just be starting to back up all my databases in the selected instances or always on availability group. Simple, right? Now let's go back to our restore job and see if it's completed the restore. All right, the restore is complete. So Shivam, let's go back to that app. And now I'm just hoping when I refresh this page, we're going to get all of that data back. There we go, triggered. All right, there you go. So that was how easy it is to configure backups for SQL servers running inside Azure virtual machines. But let's say, Shivam, you had done an app upgrade, and that basically toasted your virtual machine in Azure. You couldn't start it.
Might have happened.
Right. So by the way, what we can also do is restore a virtual machine. But before that, let me show you how easy it is to back up an Azure virtual machine natively. So let me just go to virtual machines, click plus add. And by the way, this works for both Linux and Windows, right? So this is an example of a virtual machine that I'm creating. I have the familiar create virtual machine wizard. Let me give this a name, ignite test VM. And then I will, oh, and by the way, this is Ubuntu server. So as I was saying, this is Linux. And then I can select a password very quickly. There we go, password is selected. And then I can just go click next and disks, right? But let me snap quickly to the management tab here, right? And in the management tab, there you go, it just appeared. There is backup right here. So what that means is when you're configuring your virtual machine, when you set up your management operations for your virtual machines, you can actually enable backup in Blade, and also you can enable this by PowerShell or CLI. So you can just click on, and the built-in Azure Backup associates it with a recovery services vault like this, or you can even create a new one, and we actually give it a name automatically. You can change this name if you like, but when you do review plus create, what Azure is doing is validating all the configurations that you've done for the virtual machine, and once it's done validating, it'll give you a quick summary. And in the summary, we expect backup to be showing as enabled. So let's see that. So there are all these awesome things happening. We've got management, and under management there is backup, and you see backup is enabled here. So this is really cool. And when I click create, my virtual machine is going to get backed up from the moment of creation. Isn't that awesome? And by the way, if you want to restore, and so this is the app that I think, this is the app virtual machine that Shivam was using. Once your virtual machine is getting backed up, you can just go to the virtual machine overview view, and in here under operations on the left nav, you see backup. You can go click on it, and because it is already getting backed up, you see all these operations you can perform. You see the recovery points out here. Right here, they are all application consistent recovery points. We're going to talk about that. You also see recovery type as snapshot and vault, and also vault. Now what does that mean? When a recovery point has a type snapshot and vault, it means that it's an instant recovery point, which means that the backup snapshot has been kept in your virtual machine storage temporarily so that you can recover from it quickly. This is really, really good for patching scenarios. So before you patch, you take a quick backup. The backup is really quick because it's an instant snapshot of your disks. And because it's sitting in your local VM storage, you can quickly recover from it. So that's really powerful. And then in the background, we move the data to the recovery services vault. I'm going to talk about that in detail. But let me go to restore virtual machine. And you can see the options here, restore VM, or you can even do file recovery. So you can recover individual files from your virtual machine. But since I want to replace my virtual machine, I'll go to restore VM. And out here, I'll select a snapshot and vault recovery point so I can quickly recover. And now let me pose a fun question. Do you see anything new in the screen here? And this is for people who've been using Azure VM Backup. Anything new that you see in the screen? Yeah? Wow, please give the gentleman a big round of applause. Replace existing is that new functionality we are introducing today, and it will come out in preview real soon. But what does it do exactly? So let's click on it. You can replace disks of your virtual machine in place with this option. And here you see a staging location. What this is basically like a safety check. What we do is, when your virtual machine has to be replaced in place, we actually take a snapshot of the original virtual machine and keep it in a staging location. Why do we do that? Because if we are swapping or replacing the disks and something goes wrong with the connection of the virtual machine or the disks, we can automatically roll back from the snapshot in the staging location. So we do all of that, and you don't need to worry about it at all. So you just click OK and hit restore. Your virtual machine gets recovered in place. So that is pretty much the entire built-in aspect of Azure Backup in Azure for virtual machines and SQL running in Azure virtual machines. I'll switch back to the slide deck. We just saw the demo. And let me ask you this question, Shivam. So when you were on premises, and then when you move these things to the cloud, how are you backing them up before Azure Backup happened?
Right, so I can think of two possible approaches. I mean, one, I write the custom scripts which take the VM snapshots and send the data from the VM to maybe Azure storage. That is one way. The other way is I could have run the traditional backup software in the Azure virtual machine and I could have backed it up. So these are the two approaches I generally follow today.
Those are absolutely valid approaches, and I'm sure all of us are using these approaches. But in Azure, the issue is that you're managing infrastructure. You're managing these custom scripts, you're patching them, you're patching your backup software. So there's a lot of infrastructure management there. The second thing is you don't get to manage your policies centrally. You write different custom scripts for different workloads, one for VM, one for SQL, one for something else. So you don't get all that central management. And finally, because you're deploying infrastructure for backup, which is, you can see on your right, in the virtual machine, you are now deploying that virtual machine as well. So you're managing the virtual machine's compute, its storage, availability, and it all becomes expensive. So we eliminate all of that, and I'm going to show you a bunch of architecture frames which are going to talk about what is happening under the hood with all the demos that I showed right now. So let's begin. SQL in Azure VM Backup. Now SQL is interesting because SQL has a native SQL backup plugin or a SQL backup engine. We call these type of workloads which have the native backup engine enlightened workloads. Now what does enlightened mean, right? We have an Azure Backup plugin for SQL which is actually deployed when you discover all your databases and configure backup. What does it do? It basically is able to talk to the SQL backup engine using native APIs. Now this is really powerful because I'm actually using native SQL APIs, so I get the consistency in terms of policy, in terms of setup, and it's so consistent. So you don't have to learn anything new in terms of SQL backup. It's all what the SQL backup engine does already. But the upshot is I'm now able to discover databases automatically, and then I can call into the native APIs to ask SQL backup engine to take a snapshot of my database, create the log backups, put them in VM storage, and then I orchestrate a background transfer of all these snapshots via a secure HTTPS protocol and send only the incremental blocks into the recovery services vault. Now, let me just repeat, recovery services vault is a managed entity. It's a bottomless pit to store your backups, and also it's an isolated service context. So it is secure. It's not connected to your environment. So this way your backups remain secure. Also the fact that we've enabled encryption on the recovery services vault, which is called storage service encryption or SSE. What this does is to keep an encrypted copy of your backups. So this way your backups are safe, encrypted, when they are at rest, and also in transit because they're going via the HTTPS secure protocol. So that's SQL and virtual machine backup. And just to sort of iterate the benefits of it, there is no infrastructure, no agents, no backup software. It's all built in. There is a plugin model, and when I talk about the plugin model, what I'm saying is tomorrow if I have another enlightened workload, right, I can basically have another plugin for that workload and have the same built-in capabilities, both for backup and for restore, right? And you're going to soon see that for SAP HANA workloads and other enlightened workloads as well. So that's that. And then because we are inside the virtual machine, we are inbuilt, we are able to do auto discovery, auto protection, and you just saw that graph, the green graph, which allows you to select one point and do intelligent restores. So you can figure out what is the full differential snapshot and apply the logs. We do that for you. So you get the exact point in time database when you do a recovery. So that's SQL and Azure Virtual Machine Backup and its architecture.
So wow, I cannot wait to see my mission critical SAP HANA databases getting backed up in the zero infrastructure way. But you talk about the enlightened workloads. What about the non-enlightened workloads? For example, I don't know, maybe CacheDB, maybe MongoDB, some workloads which don't have those kind of APIs. How do you get the consistent backups?
Oh, that's a great question. How many of you are actually using MySQL, workloads on Linux? Anybody? Show of hands? All right, all right. So let me show you how you can back these up. Now, the challenge with non-enlightened workloads is they don't have their native backup engine. But the good news is both Windows and Linux, they provide frameworks such as VSS or for Windows and FS3s for Linux. And the beauty is we can integrate with these frameworks, VSS or FS3s. So just as you see, Azure Backup has a plugin for Linux. It can talk to the FS3's API. But what it can also do is call a prescript. Now, what is a prescript? A prescript is basically a script that has commands for your application, example MySQL, to tell your application to freeze its IOs to the disk. Also to flush all the writes that are happening on the cache, again to the disk. And what that allows you to do is to get a very consistent picture of your application when you basically snapshot your disks. This is advantageous because when you're recovering, you don't need to do any fix-up for your application, right? It's already consistent. And then we take a snapshot of the disks, right? And after we are done taking the snapshot, we can execute a postscript. A postscript is the exact reverse of a prescript. So it tells your application to continue, writing IOs to the disk, writing to the cache, all of that, right? But the beauty is all of this is built in. So you just enable backup for your Linux virtual machine or your Windows virtual machine with non-enlightened workloads, get the prescripts and postscripts, which are developed by application partners such as MySQL, and you're good to go. So you get application consistent backup. And by the way, because this is an open source ecosystem, these scripts are actually available on GitHub. They are posted in by application providers. You can go around, tinker with them, and make them work for your needs. So all of that is covered.
I think MySQL is the enlightened workload, but yeah, I think the meta point remains the same.
Absolutely, absolutely. So having done this, let me talk a bit about the Azure Virtual Machine Backup architecture. We saw that cool experience where you create a virtual machine and you enable backup and it just works. How does all of that happen? So we have an extension which is inside every Azure virtual machine. And what this extension does is when you configure backup, it talks to the Azure Backup Service and associates itself to a policy. What does that mean? It means that if I have an inbuilt policy, as I mentioned, the default policy, I'm telling that policy that I'm a VM, a virtual machine that is registered with this policy, so it can back it up as per that policy. So when it's time for backup, as per the policy, we send a command to the Azure Backup extension, and then Azure Backup extension orchestrates a VSS snapshot or an FS3 snapshot in the case of a Linux virtual machine. Once this snapshot is available, it actually goes to your local VM storage. And this is exactly what I was talking about when I said snapshot and vault, the recovery point type. So this is an instant recovery snapshot. And you can quickly recover from it because it's right there in your VM storage. In the background, what we do is to take the snapshot and compare the snapshot with the previous recovery point and move only the incremental blocks, again, via HTTPS into the recovery services vault. And the recovery services vault has encryption enabled via SSE, so your backups are encrypted at rest and they're protected while they are in transit. So that basically concludes the VM backup architecture. Now let me talk about restores. And we saw a bunch of ways in which restores can happen. But before that, there's one more thing which I wanted to talk about. So when you secure your data, you can do that by employing Azure Disk Encryption. So when you do Azure Disk Encryption, you have these keys, the KEK and the BEK, which go to an Azure Key Vault. What we do with Azure Backup is to also back up these keys. How is that important? It's important because when you're recovering, you don't have to worry about what keys I had when the backup was taken, right? So you don't have to remember and do all the management of keys when your backup was taken. When you restore, we restore the keys for you. And that way, you're sure that you can apply these keys on the recovered data and unlock your data.
So, Saurabh, actually one question I have. I heard you have the limit of 200 virtual machines that can be backed up in a vault, but I have some departments which have like 500 virtual machines. How do I back them up?
So Shivam, that was old news. Now it's 1,000 VMs that you can back up in a single recovery services vault. So all of you who have enterprise deployments of over 500 virtual machines, 600 virtual machines, you can now back all of them up into a single recovery services vault. So let's go to restores now. So I have all these options for doing restores from a virtual machine backup, right? Although you're backing up the virtual machine, you have the fidelity to be able to recover individual files, disks. You can even recover your VM to an alternate place. And this is really handy because if you want to create a quick dev test VM, you can use this alternate VM recovery to basically recover and create another virtual machine, like a clone, right? But you can also do that when your VM goes down and you want to recover it someplace else. So that's alternate VM. But what we saw today is the ability to be able to recover the virtual machine in place. And that's the last option, which is replace disk or an in-place restore. How do we do that? So let me talk about that. So when a virtual machine is supposed to be recovered, the first thing we do is to require the user to shut down the virtual machine. We need the virtual machine to shut down to prevent any conflicts during recovery. So we shut down the virtual machine, and then we take an instant recovery snapshot of the original virtual machine into the staging location. And this is the same staging location that we saw in the demo earlier. And then we go ahead and swap the disks of the virtual machine from an instant recovery point. So what does this mean? I did not have to create any new infrastructure. I was just able to restore my virtual machine in place. And this is great because if I do a patch and it goes wrong, I can quickly recover from an instant recovery snapshot with this approach.
Wow, this was super cool. So let me summarize what I heard. I'm in backup. You showed me like a checkbox, whether I'm using the Azure Virtual Machine Backup or the SQL running in Azure VM. So all of this is like a checkbox. I get zero infrastructure, self-serve, secure backups, right? Absolutely. But I have another problem. Some of the resources I'm extending to Azure. For example, file servers. I have file servers all over, like head offices, branch offices, and I would like to see how can you actually back them up, or what do you do with that? Any recommendations?
Good point. And I think one of the other problems folks face here is you need to think about scaling your file servers because the capacity is growing. How do you do that? And Shivam talked about connecting the Azure file servers to your on-prem file servers to Azure. Let me talk about a service which we have, again, available with Azure, which is called Azure File Sync. How many of you have heard about this service? Wow, that's a lot of people. Awesome. For those of you who haven't, Azure File Sync is a mechanism for you to extend your on-premises file servers into an Azure file share. And the way it does that is it does that via sync. So what you have is an on-premises file server. It syncs it all the way up into Azure in a file share. And by the way, the interesting thing is that whatever are the least recently used files, they actually sit only in the Azure file share. So that frees up local storage, and you can grow and scale your file servers on premises. Now the question that we hear is, if this is a sync solution, what happens if I delete a file on premises? Sync would basically replicate that to Azure file share, correct? But the good news is we have backup built into Azure File Sync. By the way, this is one of the key differentiators of Azure File Sync against any other sync technology. Backup is built in. What does that mean? Let me quickly show you a demo for this scenario. Let's go back to my screen here. So what I have here is a file server, and I love elephants, so I've got all these images. Whoa, wait. I was actually going to delete one of these files and show the replication in the Azure file share, but looks like the thumbnails are also not loading. So we might have gotten a corruption here. So let me anyway go and delete this elephant1.jpg. I'm done deleting it. Now let's go to our Azure file share. So I was syncing up this file server to an Azure file share, which is right here in this storage account, Wonder Sync Storage. My file share was called Iron Share. I go click on it. And as you can see, this is giving me the same snapshot of data which was there on my on-premises server because it's all synced. Now when I go to this Ultron deletion algorithm, you can see all files exist, but elephant1 is not there because of sync. But the good news is I can recover. And the way I do that is also built into the Azure file share experience. So I just go to my Azure file share, and right at the top I see Manage Backups because I was backing this file share up. So now I can click on Manage Backups. Takes me to a similar screen as I saw for my SQL in Azure Virtual Machine, except I can now restore my entire share, or I can restore individual files. Since I lost elephant1.jpg, and I think I had a corruption of a bunch of files in the directory, let me try doing a file recovery. So I see all these restore points. I see there was a backup which was created yesterday. So let me click on that. And again, I basically select what is my restore location. since I want these files to come back to the same location, I'll just leave it at original location. And then I'll just go select my files. Now this is the coolest part. I can actually browse my recovery point from Azure, see all the files which are in that recovery point. So now if I want to verify if elephant1.jpg was in this recovery point, I just click on this directory and there you go. Elephant1.jpg is right there, which means if I recover, I should get this file back. Great. So let me go and I can either select elephant.jpg and get it back, or I can select an entire directory right here, select, click OK, and that's it. My restore configuration is done. I'll just hit restore. And while this restore is happening, let me talk about how it is built into the Azure file share experience. So if you extend your file share to Azure, you can just go to your file share. And let me go to another one which has backup not configured, Hulk share. And at the top you see backup preview is not enabled for this file share. Click here to enable backup. So it's built in to the Azure file share experience. You can also go to the recovery services vault. Let's say Wonder Sync Vault. Click plus backup. This is the same drill. Except here, under what do you want to backup, you just select Azure file share preview. Then you click backup. And again, this does a bunch of discovery. So it's discovering all the storage accounts which are in the same region and have file shares which are not protected by any other vault. So that way you don't end up doubly protecting your file shares, right? So Wonder Sync Storage, click OK. And there you go. I see Hulk share and Thor share here. I select it, click OK. Quickly select a backup policy. I can also create a new one and give it a name. I can retain this up to 120 days. And we've heard from a lot of customers that they would like to extend this retention, right, and retain their files for a long term. So we are actually actively working on this, and you should see a solution real soon to be able to extend the retention long term. Right? And by the way, when we do that, you don't need to go to each file share and change the policy. There is a central place where all these policies are available. It's right here in the recovery services vault under backup policies. There you go. So you have all these backup policies which are already configured. I can actually go change any of them, and it will automatically get applied to all the resources that are configured with this policy. So it's very simple to be able to scale changes, policy changes to all your resources from a single place. Now let's go to our restore job. Looks like it's complete. Now we will, and it took 1 minute 26 seconds. Awesome. Let's go to my, all right, there you see all the thumbnails. And by the way, my favorite elephant1.jpg is also available. Let me open it. There you go. So that basically explains how I can use the built-in restore and backup for Azure file shares and not deploy any agents or any backup infrastructure to back up my files, by the way, on premises. So if I have on-premises files connected to Azure via Azure file share, I don't need to deploy any agents on premises. I just back up the file share, and I can back up, restore, do all those operations very seamlessly. So that was the demo. Let's go back to our presentation.
Yeah.
So there is a quota that you have for an Azure file share, right, which can go all the way up to 5 terabytes.
5 TB.
It can also go beyond that. And basically, whatever quota you have, that's the number of files you can offload. But we don't have a limit. We can back up all of that. Perfect. So let's move to essentially how does it work, right?
Yeah, one question I have, you showed me, the great solution, but what happens, how do you get the consistent snapshot of the share if you are doing a sync across multiple server endpoints?
That's a good question. So if there is sync happening, what if I take a snapshot when sync has not completed? That will give me an inconsistent snapshot. Now let me talk about how the built-in nature of Azure File Sync Backup works well with this problem, right? Backup and sync need to work together. So let's say you have these two file servers. They are syncing to this Azure file share, as you can see. Now, when the sync is going on, I can't be taking a backup snapshot. But when I actually configure my backup and call my backup API, it is able to call the native APIs of the sync service in Azure, which tells the file share to pause sync for a moment. And then we are able to take a snapshot of my file share. And once the snapshotting is done, I can just resume sync. So this way, because I am using native APIs, I'm able to pause sync and then take the snapshot and get a file consistent backup of my Azure file share.
Great. I did not see you install anything anywhere. And to me, this is like truly zero infrastructure. Because I didn't have to think about backup of these on-prem file servers if they are using Azure File Sync. But here is the conundrum. I still have some file servers which need to remain on-prem due to compliance reasons, regulatory, could be other reasons. I take time to move to the cloud. So what do you do for those kind of file servers which have to be on-prem, but the backup could go to the cloud as long as it is encrypted on the wire and at the rest?
Wow, that's an important requirement. And I think a lot of customers who have this requirement, not only legal and compliance and regulatory data, but also intellectual property that you want to retain on premises and not move everything to the cloud. But we have a way to back these up without deploying any infrastructure, right? And I will show you that. But before that, let me ask you this question. How do you manage your Windows servers today?
Good question. I mean, I typically use a lot of MMC tools like Windows Firewall, Registry Editor, Server Manager, Windows Server Backup. I use all these MMC consoles to manage my Windows servers today.
Has anyone heard of the Windows Admin Center? Show of hands. That's quite a lot. Amazing. So none of you guys are using MMC tools. Awesome. Give yourselves a big round of applause for that. Because MMC tools basically slow you down. You have a bunch of windows showing up everywhere, and you have to go to a different MMC tool for Event Viewer, a different one for Windows Server Backup. Well, you have Windows Admin Center now, and what we're going to show you is the native integration of Azure Backup inside the Windows Admin Center. So let me switch to the
Can you show me how it works?
Yeah, let's take a look. Let's see. All right, so we are out here. Let's go to Windows Admin Center. I tell you what, Shivam, why don't you try this yourself?
Is it so easy to use?
Go for it.
Okay, let me try that. So let me go to the first server. Okay, I see the computer name. I see the CPU monitoring very well. Oh, I see something called Azure Backup status, not protected. Is that the one?
Yeah, let's see what happens when you go click on it.
Okay. Okay, so it asks me for the Azure subscription, so I can sign up and create one, but I already have one, so let me try logging in with that. So by the way, this server is in India.
Oh, wow.
Right across the globe.
Oh, wow. So I'm able to remotely manage my servers in India from this. Awesome.
Okay, so I see the subscription ID, the vault, looks good, but I want to back up the data as well on the server, not just the system state. 39 GB, let me see how much does it cost. So less than 50 GB, it's only $5?
Yes. So
Wow.
if you're backing up less than 50 gigabytes, it's $5 for your server.
Okay, makes sense. And then let me see the backup schedule. So I want to back up my file folders for a year, and system state is okay for 14 days. And then it asks for the encryption passphrase. It means my data is going to be encrypted with this passphrase.
Absolutely.
Wow, it's a wrong password. I hope I typed it correctly. That's it. It's super simple to use.
Absolutely. And you did not download any agents. It's going to automate the entire process of setting up your server for backing up with Azure Backup.
Excellent. So let me show.
Yeah, I do have a server which is already set up. So let's go to this one here.
Okay.
How it looks.
So you are already backing up this server for some time. And I see the jobs. There are 21 jobs. So let me see if I want to apply the patch. Click on backup now. I see the recovery points. Okay, I want to back up my file folders, so it has system state as well. Excellent.
So you just ended up triggering a backup?
Yeah.
All right.
It is showing that there is one in progress job.
That's
right?
great.
Great. So let me go to the recovery points.
So it looks like a scheduled backup was already running.
Okay, so I can recover the data from here.
Wow, this server is really far, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so I can recover. I will pick maybe the previous recovery points. So it mounts the disk for recovery. What does that mean?
Exactly. So just the way you have an instant recovery snapshot for a virtual machine, or for that matter in Azure Files, where you can go and browse all your files, in a similar way, if you back up your data on premises using Windows Admin Center, you can get access to a recovery point via the iSCSI protocol. So what that does is to mount an iSCSI snapshot of your recovery point, and you can browse that recovery point out here in the Windows Admin Center, select the files that you want to recover, inspect them, and start recovering them. So it's really simple.
Okay. So I am now looking at the jobs view. So I see the jobs for last few days. And I also see which jobs have failed. Okay. Good. I can just monitor from here. But let me see, how do you configure the errors and notifications? So you can see the same jobs in the portal, see the errors, and you can remediate it from here. But let me see if I can add one of my compliance admins to this. Maybe I'll add you for now. And I need it per alert. Okay. So this is how I can configure the alert. That was pretty fast. Okay. So one thing, you said that this feature is in preview right now. Please click on provide feedback, which takes you to this form. So I want all of us, the customers here, try out this feature. It's in preview, and please give this feedback.
Definitely. This is in public preview and available today on the latest GA release of the Windows Admin Center. Download it and try Azure Backup with the Windows Admin Center. By the way, there is one thing that I would like to add, Shivam.
Is it?
We talked about the deletion of backups, right? Let's see what happens when you try to delete backups in the Windows Admin Center.
Okay, let me try that. So if there is a ransomware attack as per your story and that tries to delete the data, let me see what's the experience.
Yeah, so ransomware, when it tries to delete backup data from, let's say, a PowerShell command or something like that.
Oh, so it's asking for a PIN.
Exactly.
To go to the portal and generate the PIN and enter it. But what about the malicious admin? If I'm a malicious admin, I know the PIN, I have access to the portal and try to delete the data, what happens?
So when a malicious admin tries to enter this PIN and delete the data, we actually retain that data for up to 14 days. And what that means is that, let's say if there was an accidental deletion or a malicious admin deletion, you first of all get alerted that your backup data was deleted, so you're informed, right? And you also have 14 days if this was accidental or malicious. You can go back to the recovery services vault right from the Windows Admin Center as Shivam showed and recover your data up to 14 days.
Wow, that's cool.
All right, let's go back to our presentation. So Shivam, why don't you summarize what you just saw?
Yeah, I can summarize what I just saw. Can you give me the clicker, please? Okay, so what we all saw was how to protect the Windows servers. You get the encrypted backups, get protection from ransomware. It was very easy to set it up. So we saw all of that. But my favorite feature is the support for Windows Server Core, because that has no GUI. And now I can manage it from a browser-based UI and manage all Windows servers. And I also get unlimited backup storage. So it's like pay as you go for storage. That's really cool.
So let's talk about security. And now I think, Shivam, because you've gotten a hang of how we do security, let's have you cover the secure backup approach under the security aspect.
So one of the concerns I hear from most of the customers, should I keep the backups on-prem or should I keep it in a locker, right? I mean, that's the analogy. And the answer is, the way we have built it in Azure Backup, it is actually not an afterthought. It is actually right there in the architecture right from day one. So what I mean by that, whether you are running your workloads on-prem or you are running in the cloud, if you're running on-prem, you get the PIN, the multiple layers of authentication, you get SSE, TLS 1.2, all of those features we have just seen. But for Azure virtual machines, we have something called Azure Disk Encryption, and also the backups use SSE. So you have multiple layers of protection. And not only that, you also have the role-based access control, even to the kind of granularity where you want some particular user to do the VM restore but not the file restore. So that is the kind of granularity we have. And even if there is a destructive operation, we inform you by sending emails. You can see the alerts on the portal, and even if you don't take any action, we have the data for 14 days. So even if the data gets deleted, it's like something called soft delete, and you can call Azure, you get your data back within 14 days. So we have built multiple layers of protection to make sure your backups are always secure.
Awesome. So looks like Shivam has sort of graduated to become a backup expert. So we'll do a change in roles, and I'm going to confer the same cap he gave to me in the beginning right away, right? So Shivam,
Yeah.
welcome to the backup expert world.
Yeah. Thank you, Saurabh. Really appreciate that. Okay. So this has happened now. Wow. Okay, so now I'll teach you about rich management.
Absolutely. Let's do this.
Okay, so the first question, everybody does monitoring and reporting. What's different here? And my single word answer is infraless, no infrastructure. And the reason for that, if you look at it, the typical questions that are being asked by the admins or the CTOs or CIOs, what's my storage consumption? Are my backups healthy? Am I meeting the SLAs? Can I do trend analysis, forecast analysis, all of that, right? Now, the point is that typically, if you see, you had to set up a server to collect the backup events. You had to deploy a lot of infrastructure to get a data warehouse, get the trend analysis. You had to use a reporting server, so a lot of infrastructure you needed. But with Azure Backup, we are already using the services that Azure provides. That's the beauty of kind of being as part of the platform. All you need is an Azure subscription and the storage account. And after that, it is just the configuration. So if you look at the value props, no infrastructure, you can get the reports and you can monitor the data across your whole enterprise, which spans multiple subscriptions and multiple vaults. And the schema that we use is like open data model. So anybody, any partner can just use it, enrich the information, create reports. So for monitoring, you can write custom queries, Kusto queries. I'll show you how to do, and also do the ITSM integration. ITSM is the ticketing system that plugs into the alerting infrastructure, and we have integration with ServiceNow, System Center Service Manager, and a couple more. And on the reporting front, you can create custom reports because we know one size does not fit all. We have the built-in reports, but you can customize the reports. It's very simple. And you get a cross-tenant support. If you have multiple tenants, you can just get the reports across multiple tenants. But let me show you a quick demo.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it. Let's switch to the demo machine.
Yeah. So I'll start with the monitoring. So if I'm a small organization or a single department, I can just go to the recovery services vault, click on the backup jobs, and you see all the backups. So I will show you one of them which has failed. So I can see the backup has failed because there was no file share. So that makes sense. You can take an action on here.
Right. So I have a question. How many of you have multiple subscriptions in Azure?
Wow,
That's a lot of people.
hands.
How do all of them do monitoring for their data?
Yeah, I'll show you how to configure that. It's super simple. So I hope, how many of you know about Azure Monitor? Because that's the one moniker for monitoring across all your Azure workloads, right? It encapsulates the log analytics, the app insights, and everything. Don't worry, even if you're a log analytics customer, it's just called Azure Monitor now with that encapsulation. But I'll show you how to configure it. So I go to the Azure Monitor, click on Diagnostic Settings, pick the subscription, give the name of the resource group. So I know you are using WonderDemo RG.
Yes.
And the WonderSync Vault, and we have not set the diagnostic. We have not turned it on. Let me show you how easy it is to do that. So I'm just calling it Ignite Pack. You can archive to, so you can pick the same storage account that you used for the first department. You can send the reporting data to the same storage account. And then I have set the data for like 365 days. Does that meet your requirement to do the trend analysis?
Absolutely, yeah.
And for monitoring, I have picked one of the log analytics workspace. The same workspace that I had. That's it. That's all you need to do to set up the monitoring and the reporting. The data will flow into the storage account and the log analytics workspace within 24 hours. It is a one-time thing.
So what that means is that the first time that I do it is going to take 24 hours, but after that it's all real time?
After that it is close to real time.
Wow.
Yes.
How do I visualize all of this?
Yeah, let me show you that. So now I am in the same workspace that I had configured. So you see the Azure Backup monitoring solution here. You just go to again Azure Monitor, click on the solutions, you see the Azure Backup. You can see that there are some of them which have failed, but before that, default is 1 day, but I can change it maybe to 48 hours. I want to, because this is the operational monitoring. So you will see the failed jobs, right, for different data sources. And today we support IS VMs and the Mars agent, but we are adding support for Data Protection Manager and SQL that you showed running in Azure Virtual Machine.
Wow, so I get monitoring for my hybrid backups and for workload backups in Azure.
Right, very true. And you can take this Kusto query, you can customize it, sort it, you can do whatever you want to do.
Awesome.
Now let me show you how to use the template for monitoring. So you can go to the GitHub that has all the quick start templates for Azure.
And what I just search for backup in this?
Yeah, just search on backup.
Lovely.
If you go through the list, this is the one that we just published 25 days ago. You pick this quick start template and it has a button called deploy to Azure. This is the monitoring solution for Azure Backup.
Lovely. So once it gets deployed to Azure, I have a template, and then I can start getting all that rich insight and visualize all of that.
Absolutely.
Amazing. You talked about Power BI and reporting.
I will come to that.
Lovely.
All you need to do is you just need to give the workspace name
I see.
and the location and agree to the terms and conditions. That's it. Now I talked about the open data model, and here is the schema that we have already published. This is the same schema that is being used for monitoring and reporting purposes. So you see the errors, the backup items, all of that here can create the custom reports on that. Now let me move on to the reporting. So we have built-in reports because that will serve maybe 60 to 70% of your needs, but you can always create the custom reports. So here, if you take the content pack for Power BI, you know how many backup items are protected to cloud, how much is the total cloud storage, all of this you get the built-in reports here. So do you have any use case which you would like to see?
Yeah, there is a compliance question that we get from a lot of customers. Compliance auditors come in and ask, they want to know about all the restores that have happened in the past few months, and they want to see the success rate of those restores. Is there a report that helps me do that right away?
So Saurabh, you're lucky. There is a built-in report for that. I have this slider showing the data for a month, and you have 5 recovery jobs. All of them succeeded. You get that. But in case you could not answer that question, you can very easily drag and drop different fields and create the reports.
Wow, that's really good.
And let me show you how to get the content pack. It's super simple. You go to Power BI, click on the Get Data on the bottom left corner, go to the services, and you again search for the same word, backup.
So this is like an in-app sort of a discovery.
Like an in-app purchase, yeah. And all you need to give is the storage account name again. I'll give you the same storage account. 9 minutes. I think we'll move to the presentation because we are almost done. Got the content pack, and that's it.
Lovely. So what we did was not install anything. I just had Power BI. I had a log analytics workspace, and I was able to get all the monitoring data and reporting data for my backups using just these 2 things and not any server or any infrastructure. Wow, thank you.
So this is the same slide, Saurabh, that you showed about the built-in data protection. We have recovery point management, storage management, all of that. But the key value props that you guys need to remember are zero infra, self-serve, lower and predictable TCO, and secure backups. Now here is the roadmap. We keep embellishing the features. There are 4 different themes. You can see that the richness on how we are going to back up. We keep adding features, but I'll give you a flavor of how we prioritize them. Like for example, I'll pick one in the availability and resiliency one, which says recover from cross-region backup copies via RAGRS. So you guys might know earlier this month, we had an outage in South Central US. The good news is there was no data loss, but there were a couple of customers who approached us and wanted to recover the data from the GRS copy. And before they could recover from GRS copy, the data center was up and running again. But we empathize with you, we understand the requirements, and the capability that we are going to add is that you should be able to recover from a cross-region backup copy using the read-only, the GRS copy. So this is how we kind of prioritize. We come up with our roadmap and we keep embellishing feature, so you keep getting more and more value. Another example we talked about when we said SQL and plugin architecture, we will have SAP HANA preview. So we are working, the team is working on that. And you can see set of other features. So again, the key takeaways are the same.
There is backup built into Azure, which delivers zero infrastructure, lower and predictable TCO, and finally secure backups.
Yeah, and this is my favorite quote. So we said backup is the second line of defense, but here we are saying Azure Backup is your last line of defense. Whether it's the ransomware, malicious admin, whatever you do, your backup data is always safe. Now, in terms of the related content, we have a session on Thursday afternoon. We have the speaker right here, Trinath, the first one in the blue, where we talk about how you implement cloud backup and disaster recovery at scale. There are other sessions. Please go through it because today is day 1 and we have a lot of exciting stuff coming up. But I would highly recommend you guys to attend the first one. So with that, here are session resources. You guys want to understand more about Azure Backup, want to understand what is this cloud-first approach, or you want to go through blogs or videos, we have a set of resources. But the most important one is the last line where we say for any preview feature, if you want to sign up, you can contact us, our team, which is Ask Azure Backup team at Microsoft.com. So please don't hesitate, reach out to us, we will respond you. And also if you have any feedback, give it to us, or you can actually post it on Twitter, at Azure Backup is the handle for that.
And that's it. With this, we've come to the end. Please do evaluate our sessions. We are now ready for questions. So there are mics which are on the aisles. We would request you to come forward to the mics and ask any questions you have. Anyone with any questions?
No.
Yeah,
Any
please go
questions, please.
I have an issue. I have a virtual machine sitting on-prem. I have Azure Backup. So I have 14 terabyte of D partitions. So when the Azure Backups is not finishing, it's taking a long time, but in this process, it's mounting my D drive,
Okay.
and causing my production D drive to be disconnected.
I see. So one of the ways that you can solve this problem is to use our offline seeding approach. You have a lot of data on premises.
14
So 14 terabytes. So it's going to take a lot of network to transfer that data. We have a mechanism to do this via offline disks. And we are also announcing limited preview with Azure Data Box. So you can use Azure Data Box. You don't even need to procure your own disks. Azure will send you these disks. You can put your backup data and send your initial copy to Azure via disk. So no need for you to choke your network or cause problems to your production data.
There's no other way other than that?
Other than that, I would recommend having, maybe there could be a fatter pipe, but I wouldn't recommend that. 14 terabytes is a lot of data. And this is secure. It's ruggedized. We encrypt your data. We compress it. So that way, you can transfer it quickly. You can reach out to us on Ask Azure Backup Team at Microsoft.com. We'll walk you through the steps.
Yeah. Well, I have an active case, actually. It's been a few weeks, and
Okay.
back and forth trying things, but
Yeah, so
couldn't solve my problem.
yeah, so we will take the case number from you and follow up
We'll catch up,
with,
definitely.
with
Definitely.
the customer support as well.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah. What's the delta in availability between? Yeah, just a minute.
We have one more person. I'll come to that question. Yeah, please. Okay.
Sir, I recently deployed on-prem Azure Backup Server with local storage. The ultimate end goal being moving all the servers to Azure. With Windows Admin Center and backing up through that, can that take the place of what I've already done locally and not have to have the storage local?
So the follow-up question is, what are you backing up with Azure Backup Server right now?
All Windows VMs.
All Windows VMs. And you're backing up just the data on that, right? There are no workloads running, or are there workloads running?
There are workloads running.
There are workloads running on them. So Azure Backup Server does take a consistent snapshot of your workloads. We will integrate that soon with the Windows Admin Center as well. But right for now, the Windows Admin Center can back up your file data. So if you have any file servers that you're backing up with Azure Backup Server, totally, you can use the Windows Admin Center and it sends the backups directly to Azure. No local storage.
So that would take the place of ABS.
Yes,
I
exactly.
think there are guys waiting here, so maybe I'll come and talk to you guys and address. You can go there, Saurabh. And
Right.
Pranav, maybe
We
you
have more questions here, so
So I think I'll address one-on-one.
Just a
That will be more efficient.
is Azure Backup supporting backing up on-prem domain controllers?
yes, we have a solution called the Mars agent. And by the way, you can access that from the Windows Admin Center. So you can actually back up the system state, which basically encapsulates your entire domain controller. So what that allows you to do is to do both authoritative and non-authoritative restores, right, by recovering system state. So just back up your system state on your domain controller and you'll be set. Thank you. Please.
Okay, so Recovery Services Vault using the SQL backup feature, but what I have found is on databases that are larger than 1 terabyte, I have one that is almost 4. What happens is if it gets into an unhealthy state, rather than picking up the backup job from when it's scheduled to do the next full, it just keeps trying to do the full. What happens is that eventually leads to a full running in the middle of my production day, which then brings the box down. So I was wondering, any thought to having it so it will not start the unhealthy?
Right.
Try to fix yourself, let me fix you, or do it on the schedule. But right, I can't have a 4
Right,
terabyte
that's a
backup running.
great point. And when we announced preview, we had support up to 1 terabyte, so it's slightly more than 1 terabyte.
Gotcha.
So we actually have that in plan when we announced GA.
Okay.
So the performance characteristics should improve. when
Okay,
we go
I
to
have one more question.
Please.
So I work in healthcare, and our clients are physician offices.
Okay.
Sometimes they want to go somewhere else, and they want to take their data with them. So being that these are backups put together and they're in the vault, it would be really nice if I could download that backup package. So just like restoring, where I can pick my restore point, I'd love to pick that same point, download that whole package that I can then put on, a lock drive and give to the client as they're leaving who wants to take their data with them, not necessarily also in Azure.
I see. But then the issue is that we do a bunch of transformations on this data, as I mentioned, which can only be accessed by a recovery services vault. So even if you were to put it in a disk, it won't be really usable. So
it doesn't come out like as a back file or a traditional SQL backup file that we
no, not yet, not yet. But we'll definitely take that as feedback, and we'll see if we can prioritize that.
Thank you.
Restore to on-prem? That's something that we can probably explore. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Aidan.
On-prem Windows servers, which is compatible with which versions?
Oh, the versions that are compatible with Windows Admin Center. So you can go all the way up from 2012. Then you have 2012 R2. You have 2016. You also have 2019 coming up, which is going to be compatible, right? And all SKUs, standard, enterprise, server core, all of that is going to be compatible with Windows Admin Center.
So does that mean that Azure Backup works for all those also?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There you go. So we are just installing Microsoft Azure Backup services, and we were looking at some SQL jobs, and within the SQL backups native app, there's a way to compress those SQL backups. I haven't been able to find that in MABs.
So you are looking for compression of your SQL backups?
Compression of the SQL backups to an on-prem NAS device.
So you want to back up, and this is SQL running inside a virtual machine on premises?
Inside of a physical machine on premises.
Physical machine on premises. So have you heard of the Azure Backup Server?
Do you have the Azure Backup? Yeah, we do.
You do that, okay. So Azure Backup Server, basically when it sends the backup data to Azure, it does compress that data.
When it goes to Azure, but what about to our NetApp?
Yeah, we don't have that solution yet. We don't back up to a NAS device yet.
Any plans for allowing it to compress?
Not at the moment, but I would recommend you to write to us on Ask Azure Backup, and we will definitely take your requirements and see what we can do.
And one more question.
Please.
I haven't heard a good answer. DFSR. So we have a large DFSR infrastructure. Our old backup system, when we were restoring, we had to restore to a alternate location and then put it into the namespace annually, so it would read all that metadata correctly or log it within its database, DFSR database. Or MABs, can we just restore directly to the location it came from, or do we have to do this workaround still?
Yeah, so unfortunately there is that workaround needed in that case, but I would recommend using Azure Files Sync, because if you have DFSR enabled and you have some sort of a multi-master sync happening, you can always send that data to a file share and back it up in the file share. So that way you don't need to even deploy Azure Backup Server, right, on premises. And when you restore, it basically takes care of those multi-master sync nodes and sets up all the namespaces correctly, so you can continue using DFSR.
And is there a 4 terabyte limit to the file share?
Currently, but when it goes GA, that 5 terabyte, I think, but it went 100 today. Awesome.
100.
Yeah, see, that's what happens.
Really?
Yeah, so 100 terabytes. See, I didn't know this. so it happened today, and yeah, you can go ahead and use it.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for coming to our session.
I think I heard part of my question earlier. So no 2008 R2 or anything before that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
2008 R2, not supported?
2008 R2 is supported by the Azure Backup Agent.
Okay.
But because it's not supported with Windows Admin Center, you might need to install the Azure Backup Agent on your 2008 R2 server.
Okay.
So there is a way to do that.
Right, and my other question was around databases. So SAP HANA, great. SQL, great. But Oracle?
Okay, so we are basically adding more and more workloads, and we are trying to prioritize based on customer asks. So I would strongly urge you to write to us, and we have a user voice feedback page. So you can go to that feedback page, which is right there in the session resources, and just put in a line item there. So that helps us to prioritize based on how many customers are looking for it. We've been hearing, honestly, a lot of ask around Oracle. So we will definitely try and prioritize this as early as possible. But if you want to get notified for a preview, please do write to us on Ask Azure Backup, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to our session.
Hi. Is there a way to use Azure Backups to backup a SQL Server instance inside a failover cluster with the storage spaces direct inside an Azure VM?
Can you repeat that? You have a SQL
I have
server?
a failover cluster instance with the storage spaces direct.
Okay.
storage
So
or
basically, you have an always-on availability group set up?
No, always.
You don't have availability group. Okay.
Classic failover cluster instances inside an Azure VM with storage spaces direct 2016 Windows.
Shouldn't be a problem. Shouldn't be a problem.
Shouldn't be a problem.
Yes. Basically, what happens is the SQL native, if SQL native backup is able to work and create a SQL back file for you, in that case, we should not have a problem to take that and basically back it up to Azure.
Okay. I thought it was not supported.
It's also supported the new feature, the new pass feature of the SQL backup.
SQL pass? You mean Azure SQL?
You started the speech, okay? You demonstrate a new functionality about the SQL backup in an Azure virtual machine.
Right.
Write a pass solution.
Oh, okay. So the Azure Backup Service is a PaaS solution. So for Azure SQL, we actually had a solution way back where it was about configuring long-term retention. But currently, this is for SQL running inside Azure virtual machines, right? So that's the current solution. But if you ever need to back up Azure SQL with this, please do let us know and we'll try prioritizing that. Thank you. Thank you for coming to our session. Thank you. Any more questions? All right. Thank you so much for coming. You're all in large numbers. Thank you so much for coming.